Commander Kyung-ho stood frozen in front of the main screen aboard his patrol ship. The vast display that usually showed the bright lights of thousands of star systems now showed only empty black space, where the Andorian spiral should have been. Glowing with the activity of billions of civilizations, there was nothing but darkness. "This cannot be right," he whispered to himself, checking the instruments again. The readings were correct. 40,000 light-years of space that had been full of life just weeks ago was now completely silent. Lieutenant Hana, his communications officer, had been trying to contact anyone in that region for hours. Her face was pale as she turned to face him. "Sir, I have tried every frequency, every emergency channel. There is no response from anywhere in the spiral, not even automated signals." Kyung-ho felt a cold fear growing in his chest. The Andorian spiral was not just any region of space. It was the most populated area in their galaxy, home to over 300 different species and countless worlds. Trade ships traveled through it every day. Military patrols kept it safe. It was impossible for such a massive area to just go. "Quiet. Send a probe," he ordered. "I want to know what happened there." The probe launched and began its journey toward the edge of the silent zone. Kyung-ho and his crew waited nervously for its first reports. When the data started coming back, what they saw made no sense at all. The probe found planets that looked perfectly normal. Cities were still standing. Lights were still on in buildings. Vehicles sat parked in streets as if their owners had just stepped away for a moment. But there were no people anywhere. No bodies. No signs of fighting. No evidence of disease or disaster. The worlds looked like everyone had simply vanished in the middle of their daily lives. "Look at this," Hana said, pointing to her screen. The probe detected a restaurant on Kepler Prime. There are still meals sitting on tables. The food is still warm, but the entire planet is empty. Officer Minsu, who handled their long-range sensors, spoke up from his station. "Sir, I am detecting similar patterns across 17 different worlds. Everything looks normal except there are no living beings anywhere. It is like they all just disappeared at the same moment." Kyung-ho ordered more probes to be sent to different parts of the silent zone. Each one brought back the same impossible reports. Entire civilizations had vanished without any sign of what had happened to them. There were no evacuation routes used, no emergency broadcasts sent, no distress signals recorded. Billions of people had simply stopped existing. News of the discovery spread quickly through the remaining parts of the galaxy. Other patrol ships confirmed the same thing from different directions. The silence was complete and absolute. Fear began to spread among the surviving civilizations as they realized they might be facing something beyond their understanding. In the ancient archives on the oldest worlds, scholars began searching through historical records that went back millions of years. What they found in the deepest, most forgotten files made their blood run cold. There were brief mentions of similar events that had happened long ago. Galaxies that had gone quiet, entire regions of space that had been full of life one day and empty the next. The old records were fragmented and hard to read, but they all mentioned the same thing. Something that came from outside normal space. Something that fed on civilizations themselves. The ancient writers had called it the hunger that comes from between and the silence that devours stars. Dr. Sun-hee, the fleet's chief scientist, studied these old records carefully. "These accounts suggest this has happened before," she told Kyung-ho during an emergency meeting. "Not just once, but many times throughout cosmic history. Whatever is doing this follows a pattern. It consumes everything in a region, then moves on. But where does it go?" Kyung-ho asked. "And more importantly, where will it strike next?" That question haunted everyone as more reports came in. The silent zone was not shrinking. If anything, it seemed to be growing slowly, expanding outward from its center like a bubble of death spreading through space. Refugee ships began appearing at the edges of the affected area. These vessels carried survivors who had somehow escaped before their worlds went silent. But the refugees were not normal. Many of them seemed broken, speaking in whispers about shadows that moved between dimensions and hunger that could not be satisfied. One survivor, a trader named Veltar, whose homeworld had been consumed just days earlier, managed to give a coherent report. They do not destroy, he said, his voice shaking. They consume. They take not just our lives but our histories, our cultures, everything we ever were. They leave the worlds intact because they have no interest in matter. They want the essence of civilization itself. As Kyung-ho listened to these testimonies, he realized they were facing something far worse than any enemy they had ever encountered. This was not a war or an invasion. This was a harvesting. And if the ancient records were correct, it had been going on since before their galaxy was even formed. The question now was not how to fight this enemy, but whether it was even possible to fight something that had been successfully feeding on civilizations for billions of years. The refugee ships arrived in scattered groups over several weeks, each one carrying survivors who spoke of horrors that made little sense. Commander Kyung-ho interviewed dozens of them, trying to piece together what had actually happened in the silent zones. Most of the refugees were barely coherent. They spoke of shadows that moved through solid walls, of darkness that seemed alive and hungry. Many had stopped speaking entirely, just staring at empty space with wide, terrified eyes. The few who could still talk described the same impossible events over and over again. They came from nowhere, said Captain Mordan, whose cargo ship had escaped from the outer edge of the Kepler system just hours before it went silent. One moment everything was normal. The next moment there were shapes moving through space that hurt to look at. They were not ships or creatures. They were like holes in reality itself. Dr. Sun-hee worked day and night to analyze the testimonies and find patterns. What she discovered was deeply disturbing. The attacks do not follow any military logic, she reported to the Emergency Council. These entities do not target strategic locations or valuable resources. They seem to consume civilizations based on some other criteria we do not understand. The refugees described entities that existed partially outside normal space and time. They could move through solid matter as if it did not exist. They fed on something the survivors called the spark of sapience, the very quality that made thinking beings different from simple animals. Lieutenant Hana had been monitoring communications across the galaxy when she noticed something unusual. "Sir, I am detecting transmissions from a system in the outer rim. The signals are very primitive, but they are communicating with some of our refugee ships." The system she had found was small and unremarkable. It orbited a young yellow star and contained only one world with intelligent life. The species that lived there called themselves humans, and they had only recently developed faster-than-light travel. "They are very new to galactic civilization," reported analyst Min-Soo after studying their initial contact protocols. "Their technology is basic, their military is small, and their territory consists of just one star system. Most established powers would consider them insignificant. But what made the humans interesting was their response to the refugee crisis. While other species were either fleeing toward the galaxy's core or trying to negotiate with the advancing threat, the humans were doing something different. They were asking questions. The first official contact came when a human vessel approached one of the refugee ships. Captain Park Jin-woo of the Earthship Explorer requested permission to come aboard and speak with survivors directly. His questions were unlike anything the refugees had heard from other species. "How fast do they move?" he asked. "Do they have a home base? Can they be tracked? What happens if you fight back?" Most species asked about evacuation routes or safe zones. The humans wanted to know about weaknesses and attack patterns. It was as if they were planning something completely different from everyone else. Word of Earth's unusual interest spread through the refugee camps. Soon, human representatives were visiting survivor groups throughout the outer rim, always asking the same types of questions. They wanted detailed descriptions of the entity's behavior, their methods of attack, and any observed limitations. Dr. Lee Soo-jin, Earth's leading xenobiologist, spent weeks interviewing survivors. Her reports back to Earth painted a picture that both fascinated and horrified human leadership. "These are not biological creatures in any sense we understand," she transmitted. "They exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. They feed on consciousness itself, leaving behind empty shells that still function but lack any spark of true life." The galactic community initially ignored Earth's activities. Human space was far from the advancing threat, and their primitive technology seemed irrelevant to the crisis. The major powers were focused on defending their core worlds and evacuating valuable populations to fortified safe zones. But some refugees began to notice something different about the humans. Unlike other species, who spoke of the entities with fear and despair, the humans discussed them with cold analytical interest. They treated the extinction-level threat as if it were simply another problem to be solved. "They do not understand what they are facing," warned Elder Zulvan of the Centauri Council. "These humans have never encountered true cosmic horror. Their ignorance will lead to their quick destruction." However, reports from human space told a different story. Earth was not preparing for evacuation or defense. They were mobilizing for something else entirely. Human industrial capacity was being converted to military production at an unprecedented rate. Their scientists were working around the clock to develop new technologies based on refugee testimonies. Most disturbing of all were the messages being sent between human military commanders. Intercepted communications spoke of hunting parties and search and destroy missions. They discussed strategies for tracking entities across multiple dimensions and methods for fighting enemies that existed partially outside normal space. The refugees who had spoken with humans began to whisper among themselves. There was something unsettling about the way these primitive beings approached the crisis. While ancient civilizations prepared for extinction or evacuation, the humans were preparing for war. "They do not fear the darkness," said survivor Cathal, who had spent hours describing the entities to human researchers. "They study it like predators studying prey. I think they are planning to hunt the hunters." As more reports came in about human activities, a disturbing realization began to spread through the galactic community. The newest species in their galaxy, barely evolved past their own planet, was preparing to do something that no other civilization had ever attempted in millions of years of cosmic history. They were going to fight back. The emergency session in Earth's United Nations building had been going on for 18 hours straight. President Park Jin-woo sat at the head of the massive conference table, surrounded by representatives from every nation on Earth. The holographic displays around the room showed star maps with growing dark zones where entire civilizations had vanished. Defense Secretary Kim Soo-jin stood before the assembly, her uniform crisp despite the long hours of debate. "The entity we are facing has consumed over 400 billion sentient beings in the past 6 months, she said, her voice steady. "Our xenobiological teams have confirmed what the refugees told us. These creatures feed on consciousness itself. They do not destroy worlds. They harvest the minds that live on them." Foreign Minister Lee Jae-ho activated another display showing the evacuation fleet positions. "The galactic hegemony has offered us transport to the preservation worlds. These are heavily fortified systems in the galaxy's core, where remnant populations can survive until the threat passes. They estimate the entities will go dormant again in approximately 200 years. A murmur went through the assembly. 200 years of hiding while these creatures ruled the galaxy. 200 years of waiting for them to finish feeding and retreat to whatever dimension they came from. Admiral Choi Hyun-soo, commander of Earth's small space fleet, activated his own presentation. "I have studied every piece of data we could gather from the survivors. These entities follow a pattern that has repeated across cosmic time. They emerge, they feed, they retreat. The cycle has been going on for billions of years. Every advanced civilization we have spoken to accepts this as a natural law of the universe." President Jin-woo looked around the room at the faces of Earth's leaders. "What are our options?" "We can evacuate," said Minister Jae-ho. "The aliens have promised us space on their preservation worlds. Humanity can survive there until this passes. We can try to hide," added Secretary Soo-jin. "Some smaller civilizations are attempting to mask their presence, hoping the entities will pass them by." Admiral Hyun-soo stood up slowly. "Or we can fight." The room fell completely silent. The idea seemed impossible. How could one small planet challenge entities that had been consuming galaxies since before Earth's sun was born? Dr. Yang Min Soo, Earth's chief scientist, had been studying the entity behavior patterns for weeks. The refugees describe beings that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. They feed on sapient consciousness by somehow extracting what makes thinking beings different from simple matter. But they are not invincible. They follow rules, even if we do not fully understand those rules yet. What are you suggesting? Asked President Jinwoo. I am suggesting that nothing in this universe is truly unstoppable, Dr. Minsu replied. These entities have succeeded for so long because no species has ever seriously tried to fight them. Every civilization either flees or accepts extinction. No one has ever hunted them back. Captain Song Min-ho, one of Earth's most experienced space commanders, had been quiet throughout the meeting. Now he spoke up from his position near the back of the room. I have been reading the historical records the refugees brought us. Every account of these entities describes the same thing: civilizations that gave up, species that accepted their fate. But what if we do something different? Such as? Asked Foreign Minister Jae-ho. What if we refuse to accept defeat? Captain Min-ho said simply, what if we treat them like any other enemy and find a way to kill them? The debate that followed was intense. Many representatives argued that fighting was suicide. These entities had destroyed civilizations far more advanced than humanity. Earth's technology was primitive compared to species that had millions of years of development. But others pointed out something that made the room go quiet. Throughout human history, their species had faced extinction-level threats before. Ice ages, asteroid impacts, plagues, wars. Humans had survived them all through stubbornness and refusal to give up. General Park Hana, head of Earth's military research division, had been analyzing tactical data from the consumed worlds. Every species that faced these entities tried to defend themselves using conventional military thinking. They fortified their worlds and waited for attack. But these creatures do not fight wars in any normal sense. They harvest. Maybe we need to think like hunters instead of soldiers. President Jinwoo called for a preliminary vote. All in favor of evacuation to the preservation worlds? 12 hands went up out of nearly 200 representatives. All in favor of attempting to hide and hope we are passed over? 8 hands rose. All in favor of declaring war on these entities and hunting them down? The rest of the hands in the room went up. The vote was overwhelming. Admiral Hyun-soo looked around the room with grim satisfaction. Then we are agreed. Humanity will not run. We will not hide. We will find these things wherever they exist, and we will end them. The SEAL decision was transmitted to the hegemony evacuation fleet waiting in Earth's outer system. The alien commanders could not believe the response. When they asked for clarification, President Jinwoo's message was simple and direct. Thank you for the offer of sanctuary, but we decline. Earth chooses to fight. We will either win or die, trying. But we will not spend 2 centuries hiding while these creatures control our galaxy. The evacuation fleet departed without any human passengers aboard. As their ships jumped to faster than light speed, Earth began the largest military mobilization in human history. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when extinction met a species that simply refused to go extinct. Within 6 months of declaring war on the entities, Earth looked like a completely different world. Every factory had been converted to military production. Every shipyard worked around the clock, building vessels designed for one purpose: hunting creatures that existed partially outside normal reality. Captain Lee Min-ho stood on the bridge of the destroyer Relentless as it tracked a devourer entity through folded space. His crew of 42 had been pursuing this particular creature for 8 months, following its dimensional signature through regions of space that hurt to look at directly. Contact bearing 27 Mark IV, reported his sensor officer, Lieutenant Kim Hana. It is trying to phase into normal space near the Vega system. Min-ho studied the tactical display. The entity was massive, easily the size of a small moon. But it moved through dimensions like a shark through water. Traditional weapons were useless against something that could exist in multiple realities at once. Prepare the dimensional anchor, he ordered. Full power to the reality stabilizers, the die. Technology had been developed by Earth scientists after studying captured devourer fragments. If they could force the entity into normal space and keep it there, it became vulnerable to conventional attack. The Relentless fired its anchor, creating a bubble of locked space-time around the entity. For a moment, the creature was trapped, in normal reality, fully visible as a writhing mass of darkness that seemed to eat light itself. All weapons, fire, Minho commanded. Nuclear missiles, particle beams, and kinetic projectiles struck the entity simultaneously. It screamed across multiple dimensions, a sound that made half the crew clutch their heads in pain, but it was wounded now, bleeding some kind of dark energy that dissolved nearby asteroids. The entity tried to escape back into dimensional space, but the Relentless followed. Minho's crew had trained for this type of pursuit. They locked their ship's navigation to the creature's dimensional signature and chased it through realms where physics worked differently. "Sir, we are losing hull integrity," reported his engineering officer. "The dimensional stress is tearing us apart." "Hold course," Minho ordered. "We finish this here." The Relentless rammed the entity at near light speed in a space between dimensions, where time moved backward. The explosion created a new star that would be visible from Earth for the next 1,000 years. Across the galaxy, similar battles were taking place. Human fleets had learned to fight in ways that other species had never imagined. While traditional civilizations tried to defend their worlds, humans went hunting. Dr. Yoon Sun-hee worked in a research station built inside a captured Devourer vessel. The ship itself was alive in some horrible way, its walls pulsing with alien thoughts. Her team had spent 2 years learning to navigate its corridors without losing their sanity. "We have traced their dimensional pathways back to the source," she reported to Fleet Command. "They do not come from another galaxy. They come from the spaces between galaxies, from regions where reality is thin." Her research had revealed something terrifying. The entities were not just feeding on individual civilizations, they were feeding on the concept of civilization itself, weakening the barriers between dimensions with each species they consumed. "If we can reach their home dimension, we can end this permanently," Dr. Sun-hee continued. "But the journey will require ships that can survive in spaces where the laws of physics break down completely." Admiral Choi Hyun-soo coordinated the war effort from a massive space station built in Earth's asteroid belt. Battle reports came in from across known space and several unknown dimensions. Human crews were fighting battles in mathematical realms, where weapons were equations and shields were logical paradoxes. "Status report from the 7th Hunter Fleet," his aide reported. "They have engaged 3 entities in the Crab Nebula region, 2 confirmed kills, 1 escaped into quantum space." The humans had developed a new type of warfare. They did not try to defend territory or protect resources. Instead, they treated the entities like dangerous animals that needed to be hunted to extinction. Every human ship was equipped with dimensional tracking equipment and reality anchor, weapons that other species watched in amazement and horror as Earth's fleets pursued entities into realms that should have been impossible to reach. Human crews fought battles in the spaces between thoughts, in dimensions where cause and effect worked backward, in regions where existence itself was uncertain. Colonel Park Jae-min commanded a special forces unit that operated entirely in non-normal space. His soldiers wore armor that could exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously and carried weapons that fired concepts instead of bullets. "Target located in the 8th dimensional layer," he reported during one mission. "It is attempting to feed on the mathematical foundations of reality itself." His team attacked the entity using tactics that would have driven other species insane. They fought a battle where the battlefield was an abstract mathematical space, and victory meant proving that the entity could not logically exist. The galaxy began to notice something unprecedented. For the first time in cosmic history, the entities were retreating. Not just avoiding certain areas, but actually fleeing from human pursuit. Species that had accepted cosmic predation as a natural law watched in disbelief as humans chased devourers across multiple galaxies. The humans treated universe-ending threats as pest control problems and solved them with the same methodical determination they had once used to hunt mastodons. What terrified other civilizations was not just that humanity was winning, but how they were winning. They had transformed themselves into something that could hunt predators who fed on the essence of consciousness itself. The war was ending. But the galaxy was beginning to realize that humanity's victory might be more frightening than the original threat. The victory celebration on Earth was strangely quiet. President Park Jin-woo stood before the assembled crowd in Seoul, looking out at faces that should have been joyful, but instead seemed haunted. The war against the Devourers was over, but the cost of winning had changed humanity in ways no one had fully understood until now. Admiral Choi Hyun-soo had returned from the final battle 3 days earlier. Her flagship, the Unyielding, bore scars that hurt to look at directly. Damage from weapons that existed in dimensions humans were never meant to visit. When reporters asked her about the last engagement, she simply said, "The threat has been permanently eliminated." Dr. Yoon Sun-hee stood in her laboratory, staring at data that made her question everything she thought she knew about reality. Her team had successfully tracked the Devourers back to their source, a realm between dimensions where the entities had existed since before time began. What they had found there would remain classified forever. "How many ships did we lose in the final assault?" President Jin-woo asked during the private briefing. "None," Admiral Hyun-soo replied. "All vessels returned successfully." "And casualties?" "0 combat deaths in the last phase." The numbers should have been cause for celebration, but something in the Admiral's voice made everyone in the room uncomfortable. The final battle against an enemy that had terrorized the universe for billions of years had somehow been won without any human losses. Captain Lee Min-ho, one of the few officers who had fought in the entity's home dimension, sat in the corner of the briefing room. His report was brief and disturbing. "We followed them to a place that should not exist. The Devourers were not the real threat. They were like antibodies, trying to protect reality from something much worse." "What do you mean?" asked Defense Secretary Kim Soo-jin. Min-ho's eyes had a distant look that had become common among the crews who had fought in non-normal space. "The spaces between dimensions are full of things that make the Devourers look harmless. The entities were actually keeping those things contained. When we eliminated them, we had to take over that job." The room fell silent as the implications became clear. Humanity had not simply won a war. They had inherited a cosmic responsibility that would last forever. General Park Hana had been studying the psychological evaluations of returning crew members. 40% of our dimensional combat veterans now test as non-standard human, she reported quietly. Extended exposure to non-normal space has changed them at a fundamental level. They can perceive things that should not be perceived and exist partially outside our reality. These changed humans were still loyal to Earth, but they were no longer entirely human in any traditional sense. They spoke of seeing the universe from perspectives that hurt normal minds to contemplate. They could navigate dimensions where mathematics broke down and logic reversed itself. Lieutenant Kim Hana, who had served on multiple dimensional missions, represented this new type of human. She could see energy patterns that existed across 17 different dimensional layers simultaneously. When she spoke, sometimes her words came from futures that had not happened yet. "The galaxy is safe," she told the assembled leaders. But safety came with a price. We had to become something other than what we were. Reports began coming in from across human space. The colonies that had been converted to military production were not returning to normal civilian operations. Instead, they continued building ships designed for transdimensional warfare. When asked why, the colonial administrators gave the same answer: "The job is not finished." Dr. Yang Min-soo had been analyzing the entity technology that human forces had captured during the war. What he discovered was deeply unsettling. "The Devourers were not evil in any sense we understand," he reported. "They were part of a cosmic immune system, designed to prevent sapient life from advancing too far and breaking through the barriers that keep our reality stable." "And now that we have eliminated them?" President Jin-woo asked. "Now we have to fulfill that function ourselves," Dr. Min-soo replied. "We have become the guardians of dimensional stability. If any species in our galaxy develops technology that threatens the barriers between realities, we will have to stop them." The galaxy's other civilizations had begun to notice changes in human behavior. Earth's fleets still patrolled normal space, but they also operated in dimensions that other species could not even detect. Human vessels were spotted in regions that existed only in mathematical theory. Ambassador Lee Jae-ho received confused communications from the Galactic Hegemony. "They are asking about our new territorial claims," he reported. "Apparently, we now control regions of space that exist in negative dimensions. Our sovereignty extends into realms where the concept of territory has no meaning." President Jin Woo realized that humanity had won their war against extinction, but the victory had transformed them into something that other species found difficult to understand or trust. They had saved the galaxy, but they had done so by becoming cosmic predators themselves. The final report from Admiral Hyun-soo was simple and terrifying. "The Devourer threat has been eliminated permanently. We have taken over their function as guardians of dimensional stability. Humanity now exists partially outside normal reality, and will continue to do so for as long as the universe requires protection from transdimensional threats." Earth had chosen to fight rather than flee, and they had won. But their victory had made them into something that made even ancient civilizations nervous about what humanity might do if ever threatened again. The universe was safe, but it was now under the protection of a species that had proven capable of hunting extinction itself.